unlocking the power of your balance sheet to grow and protect wealth in volatile times.
Hey there, this is Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, and welcome. We're here to do the first in a series that we're going to be working on about financial strategies and how to do the math and have the math tell you what to do. A lot of times people don't really understand how to use all the tools in their toolbox. You know, if you go back in the old days, it used to be creative real estate was one of the hot topics, because when you're in a situation where financing isn't readily available, at least conventional financing isn't readily available, you got to think outside the box. And so in this particular case, we're going to be talking about resort property and how do you buy resort property when there's no financing available. In other words, you go on vacation, you're in this beautiful part of the world and you see this beautiful property, like, oh, I'd love to own a property here, maybe buy it, rent it out, and somewhere down the road, retire here. And you go into your friendly neighborhood real estate office there in town, and you find out that there's no financing available. You think, well, gosh, I don't have $300,000-$400,000 of cash to buy this beautiful property. And you feel a little left out. Well, today, we're not only going to show you how you can acquire that property, but we're going to show you how you can acquire it for free. In other words, it doesn't cost you anything. And I know that sounds like late night TV, but it's not. It actually can be done, either a whole or a piece of that property. And so we'll explain how all that is going to happen. And to do that, I want to introduce you to our guests. So our first guest is Stephanie Riley. And she is a mortgage professional, what I call a strategic mortgage professional. Some of you who know me from the radio show know that I have a background in the mortgage business. And what I brought to the table was the ability to use mortgages creatively as a tool. And right now we're living in an era, depending on when you're watching this, we're recording this in September of 2021, where money is basically free. Mortgage money is basically free. You can get really, really cheap rates locked in for 30 years. And it's just an outstanding time to be a borrower. And of course, that's reflected in some of the prices in real estate. And a lot of people have equity. That's what happens. And the question is how safe is that equity? What could you do with that equity? What can you do with these loans? And so all of that is kind of baked into this. But Stephanie is somebody who understands those strategies and knows how to work it out in the real world. So Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. So, and then our next guest is David Kafka. And David is a broker in the little country of Belize, a country Robert Helms and I know very, very well and love dearly. And David is one of the top brokers in the entire country, which sounds super impressive. And it is, except Belize is only about the size of New Hampshire, and it only has the population of about Anaheim. So it's still a big deal to be up at the top of the food chain, but it's a real niche little market, beautiful, beautiful place of the world. You know, we've been going down there for about 15 years now, and we're big fans. And so through that effort, we've met David, and David understands these strategies as well. And he's somebody that is an investor himself, expat, former American, now living in Belize. I guess you're still an American, David, right? But living in Belize. So David, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited. So here's what we want to talk about. David, let me start with you. Every day you're out there and you've got people coming into your office on vacation typically, and then they fall in love with the country and they want to own a piece of it. And, you know, you've got people that fit into different categories. And so we don't know who's watching this, but just talk a little bit about the types of people that come in and what they're looking for and some of the challenges that you run into or they run into when they're actually trying to go from dream to reality.
Yeah, I'd say most of the people that we have that comes to our office are North Americans, with the majority of them being from the US. And so when they come here, they have the expectation that they can buy with 10 to 20% down using financing.
Yeah, and then you have to deliver the bad news, right? They look at the property, they fall in love with it. They have that they can imagine themselves enjoying it, sipping a Mai Tai with their toes in the white sand, looking out over the crystal blue water. And you have to do the big takeaway. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't going to happen unless you can come in full cash. And so people come in as buyers and they're looking to relocate. They're looking to retire. expats, or maybe in today's high-tech world, they've discovered, hey, I can work from anywhere. Why not work from paradise? So owner occupants. And then there's other people that come in and they're second home buyers. There are people that like, hey, I would love to have a place to come, maybe work a couple months out of the year or take summers off or whatever their gig is. Then you're going to have investors. Now you have people coming in looking at on the investment side of these properties too, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of them are not quite ready to retire, but they want to go ahead and buy something now while the prices are still affordable, rent it out, make that ROI, and then possibly live here in the future. But then we do have quite a few of people that are just looking for the straight ROI.
Right. So it's cash on cash, meaning that these are income producing properties. You can Airbnb them or vacation rentals by owner. Sometimes they're part of a bigger complex. I know you represent a complex like that, where there's a management and a marketing in place, and you just put it in the rental pool and you derive income and split it with the management company. You really don't have to do anything. So that's a way to generate income. Plus, you get the benefit of personal use. When it's not rented out, you can come down and use it yourself. You may have to pay a little bit, to cover the overhead to the management company, depending on the deal. But it's a great way. And one of the other great advantages, and of course, I'm not a CPA, and neither either of you, but I know from it's my understanding, and I know from personal experience, that if you own an investment property, and when you go to check on it, that trip and those expenses related to it are tax deductible. And so if you do this properly, check with your own CPA, it could be a way that you can make some of those trips all or partially tax deductible, which really brings down your cost to travel. So that's kind of exciting. So Steph, back to you. So obviously, David just said there's no financing available in his country of Belize. You represent a mortgage company that has that loans in 48 states.
Mhm.
Do you guys loan in foreign countries?
No, we do not. However, there are a number of clients who have built up either equity in their primary residence or equity in a portfolio. Maybe they own 3, 4, 5, 10 little 1 to 4 unit residential investment properties. And if they've bought them, which is common scenario, if they've bought them a few years ago, they're sitting on a lot of equity. And so there are strategies that clients are using to invest using financing and take that financing to invest offshore.
So in other words, what I'm hearing you say, and I know this from personal experience because I've done it, you can actually apply American financing, which is some of the best financing in the world, lowest rate, government subsidized. So it's super cheap. You get 30-year amortization, fixed rate for that entire period of time. You get access to all this capital, very cheap. In many cases, the interest is tax deductible. Again, check with your CPA, but it's my understanding when you borrow money to make an investment in particular, that interest is tax deductible. So if you figure if a third of it is tax deductible, maybe a 3 or 4% loan only costs you 2.5 or 3% in the net world. That's next to free. That's like free money.
Yeah.
And you think, oh gosh, I just sure wish that was available for me in this beautiful paradise that I want to buy into. So when I was faced with that dilemma, I did exactly some of these strategies that we're about to get into. So what we're going to cover is we're going to talk about equity transfer. It's a way you move equity from one market into another market, or from one property into another property. If you were willing to make a payment, in this case, let's say Belize, if you were willing to make a payment on the subject property that you're going to buy in the new country, you just make the payment in the US against another property. So that one's pretty straightforward. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The other one is a little bit more sophisticated, where you use a concept called arbitrage, which I'll describe, to come out of it cash flow neutral. In other words, you don't have any payment. You organize your portfolio in such a way that all the debt you take on is service. That's all real estate investors do anyway, right? We buy a property, we buy a stream of income. And if we balance out the debt and the income properly, we end up with a property that literally pays for itself, and we just have a little bit of capital invested. I can actually show you how to take it a step further, where you really have none of your own capital invested. You've only transferred equity and acquired cash flow to service the payment. And you can do that either for an entire property, if you have sufficient equity, or you can do it for what we call fractional ownership. So I'm going to ask David to explain that in just a moment. But let's just start out with the first one, Steph. So let's talk about equity transfer. Can you describe kind of just high level what that basic strategy, and believe me, ladies and gentlemen, it's the simplest strategy to understand.
Well, it's so funny because oftentimes we think of our equity in a property locked, and to some extent it is locked up in that particular property. But when you start stepping back and looking at your portfolio as a whole, you realize that you can move on your balance sheet this equity to other places and kind of separate it from being locked up in a property. Because let's face it, if your equity is locked up in a piece of property, if market values drop, poof, that equity's gone. If you get into a situation where maybe you lost your job and now you can't qualify for financing, that equity may still be there, but unless you're willing to sell the property, your ability to tap into that equity just poof, disappeared. And so it's not as safe as some people, originally think that it is. When you start to open your mind to tapping into that equity, you realize you can actually, if you can qualify, and that's where our team is expert at figuring out how to do that, you can actually cash out, refinance equity from property A, let's say, and then use the cash out proceeds to buy property B, even if property B is an all cash purchase offshore. Nothing stops you from being able to do whatever you want with that equity once it's separated from property A.
Yeah. And Steph, you and I are part of a financial strategy mastermind. And we get together with CPA, we get together with people who understand qualified retirement plans, we get together with people who understand crypto, and we all brainstorm together to come up with these strategies based on what is going on in the market, what are the current tools. One of the reasons, folks, to consider moving equity from one property to another property on your balance sheet is not just to gain access to the new property, it's to protect the equity. Let me give you an example. So, my partner, Robert Helms, and I were very active and remain active in the country of Belize. And that's part of how we know David. And in the 2008 great financial crisis, we watched a lot of air come out of the American market. And when I say air, I mean, there's a lot of equity that exists on balance sheets that, to your point, Stephanie, can go away if the market turns or if the financial market seized up. And that's what happened in 2008. The credit market seized up. The air coming into the equity jump house, I call it went away, and all the prices dropped. But David, in Belize, you had a different experience. Tell us about that.
Yeah, because it's pretty much a cash market, we didn't lose prices. We didn't lose equity, if you will. We still had a rise. We still saw appreciation, in 8, 9, and 10. So it was definitely not a quote unquote bubble market in Belize at that time.
Yeah, because there's no air. And this is a really, really important point. So it's not just for personal enjoyment or the opportunity to get another property, or even wealth building. This is about wealth preservation. And if you understand the difference in a market that has leverage and one that doesn't, well, people were seeing their house prices fall precipitously in California, in Florida, in Arizona, all over the United States. Belize prices didn't do that because there was no air in the market to start with. So there was no air to come out of the market. Sure, things slowed down a little bit, but it still continued to hold its value. So this is a safety play in addition to these other situations. Now, of course, if you walked into David's office and said, hey, I want to make a small down payment and buy a property, and then I'm willing to make a payment to own that property, then making the payment in the United States at a lower interest rate with a longer amortization schedule is actually a better payment to have. Mm-hmm. And so you combine the two benefits of having better financing, a better payment, and equity that is in a market that's not in a bubble. And then you add to that this idea that now I've got a property that I really enjoy. From a net worth perspective, your net worth hasn't changed. You've moved equity from property A to property B, but on your balance sheet, it's still there. But you have changed your payment structure. So that is a way to do it. Not everybody can hang with having that bigger payment. And we're going to talk about strategies to make that go away in just a second. But that's the basic concept of an equity transfer. Okay, so those are the reasons to do it. So let's move on to the next one. There's a concept out there called arbitrage. And Steph, I'm going to let you explain that.
Yeah. So with arbitrage, the idea is you're making money with other people's money at a yield that's higher than your cost of funds. So let's say that you cash out, refinance a property or portfolio of properties, and let's say your mortgage rate for that financing is 3%. You cash out, refi. If you were to take some of the cash out proceeds and invest that at, say, 6, 7, 8+% in a similar instrument. So in one case, as the borrower, you're using a mortgage as the borrower at the 3%. Then you use the same instrument, a mortgage, and you're now the lender, and you're lending at 6, 7, 8%. The arbitrage is the spread. So you're making a positive arbitrage of 3, 4, 5% on that money. Well, if you're borrowing at 3% and investing at 6%, you can actually cover all of your payment on your cash out refinance with half as much money, because you're doubling the rate of return from the cost, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's just do like a real life example, simple math. Everybody's going to be able to understand. Say I've got $200,000 of accessible equity. And Steph, you put together a report to talk about, kind of what that looks like based on loan programs and qualifying. And if people are interested in that report, you can get it by sending an email to cashout@realestateguysradio.com. That's cashout@realestateguysradio.com. But the point is, you take out, say, a couple $100,000. And let's say, let's use your number, Stephanie. In fact, let's be a little bit conservative. Let's say it's 4%. Now, I know rates are lower than that as we're recording right now, but let's call it 4%. So you borrow out at 4%, and you have now 4% on $200,000. That's $8,000 of interest. And it's probably deductible, but we're just going to use the gross numbers pre-tax. Okay. $8,000 going out. You take $100,000 of that and you invest it at 8%. And now you have $8,000 of income coming in. So you take a loan and you make a loan, and you are there. Now you might be saying, gosh, where could I get 8%? Well, Stephanie has several relationships with people that for her clients, she makes those referrals, and she can help you find those kind of yields to do this arbitrage. It's a technique that we've been doing for a long, long time. And it's absolutely one of my favorites because it makes the money free. So now I borrowed at 4%. And I have an $8,000 payment. I've invested half my proceeds, $100,000 at 8%. And so I have 8,000 coming in on 100,000 to cover the 8,000 going out on the 200,000. So I'm cash flow neutral at this point. But what I have now is I've liquefied my equity. I have $100,000 of cash that has no payment attached to it. So what I can do now with that extra $100,000 is I could go buy a property. Let's say I decide to go into a property like where David is. And if he could find a property that was only $100,000, then I would be able to buy that property for cash in his market. But effectively, it didn't cost me anything. I'm in for free. Get that concept? So if you have enough equity in your portfolio to pull out $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000, you can actually go into another market and acquire that second property literally for free. And so it's not that complicated once you know how to do it and you've got the right people on your team who can help you do it. But most people don't think this way. And I know this because I've been doing this for a long, long time. And when you show them, they're like, wow, that's amazing. I can have that property I dreamed of. And not only do I not have to pay for it, I can literally have it for free as long as you have some equity on your balance sheet to reposition. Steph, before we move on to the, David, let me flip back to you. So some of these properties that you have actually generate income. So Stephanie talked about arbitraging based on making a loan. In other words, you take out a loan and you make a loan. And that's basically either investing in a private note, which is secured by a piece of real estate that has its own income stream, or you can invest in a pool if you're an accredited investor where you can get yields of 8, 9% or higher. And Stephanie has several relationships with folks who can do that. But you may decide, hey, I'm willing to bet on the income of the property. And so again, you're not in danger of foreclosure on the income on the property. Where you want to make sure you have the payment is whatever the source of the equity was. But David, some of these properties actually cash flow, right?
Yes, they do. Yeah, we have, depending on what you're at, I also represent, Mahogany Bay, which is the Curio Hilton in Ambergris Key in San Pedro. And that has a property that you can buy it, investors can buy it. It's totally hands off and it produces income depending on what type of unit it is. We can have that conversation online or offline, sorry. And it produces, income, minimum, 5%.
Okay. So if someone can borrow at 3 and invest at 5, they're covered. And they maybe even have a little extra profit. And then you add on the idea that you get some personal use, or you add on the tax deductibility and of both the travel and the interest on the source payment. And now you've begin to get a footprint for people who are interested in having a legitimate offshore business. You now have an income producing property, a rental property business, if you will, offshore. And, or you could buy it, I mean, David, you represent a lot of the market. They could buy their own individual property and just throw it up on Airbnb or VRBO or whatever, and do the same thing. So it can be very turnkey if you want to plug in with a major provider like a Hilton, which has some real advantages. Of course, they get a piece of the action, so there's that. Or you can manage it all yourself, and and do that. So you can either generate the income to cover the source payment. Again, you've borrowed money out of a property that has equity in it, and you can borrow that money out, and then you can generate the income to cover it either through the income on the property or a high yield debt, or a combination of both. Or you may be willing to put in a little bit of payment to backstop it yourself in order to have the property. So you can kind of mix it up. And part of that, Steph, I'm going to come back to you, is the idea that if you like this idea and you want to start to accumulate, which is another topic we're about to talk about, this gets a little deep into the weeds of the mortgage business, but talk a little bit about debt to income ratios. How much of this income might qualify for helping them for the next purchase, if you will, and then the decision about how you choose to organize your portfolio for that income may depend on managing the relationship between how much debt service you have versus how much income you have coming in. It's not just your job, but there's other sources of income. So Steph, talk about that for just a moment.
It's a huge point, and it can get pretty complicated because when we're talking about an investment portfolio's income, oftentimes most lenders are going to look either at a long-term lease agreement, or in this case, being offshore and operating kind of like a business, they're going to want to see a history showing up on your tax returns of this consistent, stable cash flow coming in. Now, when we incorporate the tax returns, this is where kind of the power of the team, of working with a team of advisors that are expert in their area, comes into play. Because
now, when you say team of advisors, you mean, a strategic mortgage consultant, a CPA, maybe some other folks, but those are the two
an
main
asset
ones.
Protection attorney, a retirement account custodian, and then your asset managers or your property providers, such as David, because it's all intertwined. For example, you might decide, if I'm going to arbitrage for my particular situation, I'm going to arbitrage maybe with the portion that I need, the capital that I cashed out that I need to invest to cover the increased debt service. I might choose to put that maybe in a US property because I have a unique situation where I can take massive advantage of bonus depreciation, let's say, and that's going to free up more capital to invest because that's money I'm no longer going to be paying in tax. So it becomes very complicated, and you really need all the advisors on the same page, understanding your situation. But for someone else who maybe can't take advantage of that particular tax depreciation and all that, they may decide, okay, I'm going to allocate this arbitrage, the capital to cover the debt service on a cash flow property. And then I'm going to put the capital that's free into maybe more of an equity growth or a lifestyle investment. And, that's more down the road. So it really depends on a person's particular situation, and the tax comes into play quite a bit.
Yeah. So I think the lesson here is, folks, don't try this at home. You're going to want to have advisors helping you, because the reason, I'm in the mastermind and I'm pretty good at this stuff. I mean, I've been doing this a long, long time. But when you actually go to implement, the devil's in the details. And if you don't have those technical advisors that really know the loan programs, the state of the union there, or really know the tax code and the state of the union there, then when you're actually at the point of making tactical decisions in your strategies, you don't have the inputs that you need. Or you listen to one person and they say, hey, this is how you reduce your taxes, and you reduce your taxes all the way down to where you can't qualify for the loan anymore. And that's a big issue, because since the great financial crisis, there's a lot more emphasis on actually being able to prove your income. So when you show up with your tax returns and you've managed them all the way down to low income and low tax, now you can't borrow. And so there's a lot there. So I don't want to glaze over that point, because it's a good one. Now, for those of you that have been sitting here watching this go, well, I feel so left out because I only have, maybe $100,000 of equity that I could tap into, and I can't do anything but buy a shack. Of course, if it's a shack on the beach in Belize, it might go, but let's say for a moment you're feeling a little left out. Let me tell you what I did when I was in that situation. And it was based on a concept called fractional ownership. So before I share the strategy, David, can you just explain the difference? And this is an important difference, because most people who go on vacation often find themselves in some type of a timeshare presentation so they can win the free luggage, or they spin the thing and maybe they're going to win cash or a free night stay somewhere. And then they get the big hard pitch on timeshare. Fractional ownership kind of feels like timeshare, but it's not. It's very, very different. David, can you explain the difference between timeshare and fractional ownership?
Yeah, so a timeshare, you usually have points into a group of resorts. You don't actually own anything. You don't own the unit. You're not on the title or anything. Whereas fractional, you are actually take possession of the title through an entity. So you are actually a physical owner of this property, usually through a LLC where you own shares in the company. So you actually have a basis where you actually own something physical.
Yeah. So to just restate it in layman's terms, timeshare, you own time and use. Fractional ownership, you have time and use, but you own real estate, either directly or indirectly through an entity. Okay. Big, big, big difference. So all the things you love about timeshare, having access to the property and being able to use it, wonderful. The things you hate about timeshare, meaning that you don't actually own anything. They're using your money to pay for their property, and they usually sell their piece, the piece that you get, for a huge profit over the actual cost of the property. So it's not a great deal. I'm not a big fan of timeshares, but I'm a huge fan of fractional ownership.
And
so
last time I checked, timeshare points don't help you qualify for any financing.
Yeah, and they don't show up on your balance sheet as an asset,
Right.
whereas these will. So you have the chance for equity growth. You have the potential for income. You have the potential for tax breaks, depending. Check with your CPA. So let me talk about fractional ownership. So let's combine some of these strategies. So the idea is now, okay, I'm on vacation and I stop in a beautiful property and area in Belize. I go into David's office and say, hey, David, I'm really interested in this property. And he goes, well, this is, a 4-bedroom, whatever it is. And just give us an idea. So let's say that somebody wanted something in one of those really nice resort properties, David. What are we talking about if they wanted to buy a nice property big enough to bring their family down in? How much money are we talking about?
Like a 3-bedroom house, probably in the 550 range, 600 range.
Okay, so to keep the math simple, I'm just going to call it 50,000. Okay, or 500,000. Okay, so let's say it's a $500,000 property in Paradise. And you say, well, I don't have a $500,000. I don't have $500,000 in equity. Now you go out and you do a cash out refinance on a property you do have for $100,000. And you do the arbitrage where you put $50,000 of it into a high yield to cover the payment. And you take the other free now $50,000 and you buy 1/10. So you get 9 other friends together who all do the same thing. And I did this. And you each of you take that $500,000 property and you slice it up into 10 equal shares. Okay. And so that means $50,000 per person. And that's how you capitalize that acquisition. They're all doing the same thing. Nobody has a payment at this point in time. You're all sharing this property. So it's just like you share a timeshare, except this is a real estate share, fractional ownership. So you own 10% of the property and each of your friends own 10% of the property. All right. So now for that 10%, let's say that each of you get 2 weeks of personal use per year. So there's 10 of you. That means 20 weeks out of the year, this property is not available to be rented out. You and your family get to stay in it, or your partners get to stay in it. But that means 30 weeks out of the year, it is available. So a property like that, David, what would it rent out for, say, on a weekly basis? Just ballpark figure.
$800 a night.
Okay, so 800 times, so call it $5,000 a week.
Yeah.
Okay, so $5,000 a week times 30 weeks, but it's probably not going to be rented the whole time. So let's say it's only rented half the time. So now you got, instead of 5 times 30 would be 150,000. You've got 75,000, half that coming in. $75,000 coming in. Remember, you have no payment. You're in for free. And so you and your friends are splitting the 75,000, 1/10 each. And so, and let's say you've got a management company. What would a management company take on that? Maybe 50%?
If it's totally hands off, yes, but a VRBO would be about 30%.
Okay, let's go worst case scenario. Let's say you take half of it. Okay, so now the math gets complicated. Let's bump it up to 80,000 just to keep the math simple. And then meaning that now you've got you got this $80,000 of income coming in, and you've got to split it with a management company. So you're getting $40,000 for your group. $40,000 divided by the 10 of you means each person's getting $4,000 a year. So you have $4,000 coming in to pay for your travel and your vacation during those 2 weeks. And you don't have any expense to stay in the property. So you have $2,000 a week paid vacation. Somebody's paying you to take a vacation. This is the way these strategies work. You're in 100% for free. All you've done, and you own something. You moved equity from your balance sheet, $100,000. You put $50,000 into the resort property, and you put $50,000 into a high yield investment. You increased your income. You got a free vacation that's worth $5,000 a week. That's a $10,000 per year benefit on a let's say the full 100,000. I mean, your return's actually infinite because you don't really have any money in the deal. But let's say you did. On the 50,000 you put in the deal, you've got this $5,000 person. You're getting a 10% annualized return in terms of benefit, the money that you're not spending to take a vacation in your property, right off the top. Plus you get the income to pay for your vacation. Plus the trip is now tax deductible. Check with your CPA. But see, it's a simple strategy. And you say, well, gosh, I could do $500,000. I could take down the property all by myself. Do you think that you and your friends, if you had 10 similar friends who could each take down a $500,000 property, instead of doing that, you said, hey, let's buy 10 properties in 10 markets and have 2 weeks vacation per year in 10 different markets. And now I've got a great lifestyle and it hasn't cost me anything. In fact, it pays me to have this fancy lifestyle. My travel is paid for, everything. And this is the power of financial strategy. It's why we're doing these series, because all the tools are out there. Everybody has them. Everybody goes to the resort properties and they see it and they can see how much money's coming in. And everybody understands loans and how to take out loans. And everybody understands kind of the idea of tax deductions. But for some reason, if you don't put it together into a cohesive strategy, you don't know how to use any of the tools. And this is why the strategy mastermind team, Stephanie, that you and I are a part of, is so powerful. Because when you go to implement a concept, we just put it in a video like, oh, you just do this, you do that. It sounds so easy, right? And then you go to implement it. You're like, oh my gosh, the devil's in the details. But this is where your technical advisors are really able to step in and help you. So, David, now, You also put together a report about Belize. So if somebody's been sitting here listening, let me plug Belize real quick because I'm a huge fan. Only English speaking country in Latin America, which means if you're an American and you're comfortable speaking English, you go to Belize, everybody speaks English. The contracts are in English, everything you do, everybody knows how to speak English. Now, they may have other languages, but everybody knows how to speak English and they expect to. That's number one. Number two is the currency trades at a peg to the US dollar 2-to-1. That's fantastic. If you've ever gone to Mexico, you never know. Is it 15-to-1? Is it 10-to-1? Is it 12-to-1? And then people sometimes down there try to hustle you because they think you don't know. And then all of a sudden you're overpaying for everything. You don't have to worry about that in Belize. In fact, they will take American dollars. You don't even have to convert them. You don't have to walk around with Belizean currency. You can just walk around with American currency and they'll happily take it. Very, very simple. So that part's great. In Belize, David, correct me if I'm wrong, you can own real estate in your own name on the water, unlike Mexico. Is that true?
That's true.
Yep. So if you've ever gone down to Mexico and dreamed of owning a beachfront property, which I did, I couldn't take property title in my own name. I couldn't actually own it. I had to buy into a Mexican trust called a fideicomiso. And then that allowed that owned the property. And what I had was basically a 99-year lease. So that's a huge thing. It's only 2.5 hours from Dallas. And there are several direct flights from several major cities in the US, and the list goes on and on. I mean, we could go on and on about how awesome Belize is, but we don't have to because David wrote a report. And the report is called, let's see, David, let me look up the title, How to Buy Property and Use Leverage in Belize, even in Belize, in a market that has none. So if you're interested in that report, send an email to buy, like B-U-Y, buy Belize at realestateguysradio.com. Buy Belize at realestateguysradio.com, and you'll get that report. And if you're interested in Stephanie's report, 7 Secrets to Getting the Max Cash Out on Your Refinance, and believe me, it's not as easy as it sounds. And a lot of mortgage professionals don't know how to do it the way Stephanie knows how to do it. Then send an email to cashout at realestateguysradio.com. So Stephanie, any closing thoughts for anybody? Anything that you think we left out that people need to know when they go to implement this type of a strategy?
I think the only closing thoughts are right now is such an amazing time. I mean, it's a broken, dysfunctional advantage to be a borrower and a real estate investor. And then you marry the US equity with the Belize economy that hasn't yet experienced financing. I mean, it's exciting, the opportunity that is in front of us right now with this.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is you're moving equity from what is arguably a more bubbly type of an environment to one that is not so much. And so that's a great point. And then, of course, you're moving assets offshore, which from an asset protection perspective is much safer. Very difficult for people to put a lien or attach or attack you in any way for property you own offshore, if they can even find it. And so there's some asset protection considerations there that are real great. So David, from your perspective, if there was financing available to you as you're selling properties in Belize, what effect would that have on the properties, or the prices on the properties that are already there?
Well, if we think about what happened with student loans and cars, they just went up in value. So we're gonna see the value just skyrocket once affordable financing comes in.
Yeah, and that's something we always talk about, is the idea, hey, if we can get in front of that wave, the world is awash in debt and needs to continue to acquire more debt. And in order to place that debt, there needs to be collateral. And what happened in 2008 is we had the same problem, is people were out looking for secondary and tertiary markets that had decent collateral. And when you own world-class resort property, that's attractive collateral for lenders. And that's not available yet. And we're not saying for a fact it's going to come. But if it were to come, and you're in the market first, that's a huge, huge benefit. It's one of the reasons why we've been such fans of Belize for the longest time. We think that, sooner or later it's going to happen, but it doesn't have to for us to be able to do what we want to do, which is what these strategies are all about. So Stephanie and David, thank you so much for your time today. Really good information. Again, if you want Stephanie's report on how to get 7 secrets to getting the max cash out on your refinance, send an email to cashout@realestateguysradio.com. And if you want David's report on how to buy property in Belize, even when there's no leverage in the country, but you can use leverage, then send an email to buybelize, B-U-Y Belize, B-E-L-I-Z-E @realestateguysradio.com. You'll get those right away. And then you can follow up with these folks if you think any of this is interesting to you. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and attention today, and we'll see you on the radio. Before you go, 3 things. Number 1, subscribe. When you subscribe, you build up our subscription base, and that helps us reach more people. But even more important, it helps us attract great guests and subject matter experts to share their ideas and information with you. Number 2, click that notification bell to make sure that when we do post a new video on this hot topic, you're notified right away. And number 3, share. Please share this information with friends. Help them get on board this bus. Help them protect and preserve their wealth to take advantage of what's going on in the world today. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next video.